we should call, are you all set for us?
Okay.
So we should call this to order.
Yep.
And we have 2 tonight?
Well, yeah, because,
Or 2.5?
yeah, basically 2, which is probably going to look like 4. So we actually have a lot more policies to bring forward, but I just felt for tonight, for the fidelity of these 2 policies, it would be good, because I think we need to have some discussion on, especially the social networking one. I think can be a little bit more complex than the other one.
I was thinking
That one.
Yeah, so I think if we just spend time talking about that one tonight, I
Okay.
don't see the administering medicines to students to be a big
No.
topic, but I think I have,
was,
What was driving that change?
so what's driving it actually is the Narcan.
Okay. Okay.
The ability
So we're
to do
inclusive of that,
We want to
sure.
be inclusive of Narcan, and actually, I'll tell you, Chief Joe Flanagan, here in the fire chief
Yeah.
here in Boylston, he actually offered very willingly. He's done the training to all of the administration, so we're all
Good.
trained on that.
Good.
And then he's now also going into a staff meeting and providing the training to all the staff. And the reason why we're doing that, and then we want to be able to have it in our AED boxes as well. That's what he recommends, is where we put it. And what we want to do is at least train the staff. We're not telling the staff that they have to do it or they have to, but at least if there's ever a crisis or a concern, they're qualified to be able to
Good.
utilize the Narcan. So right now, we're not allowed to have anybody do anything except for nurses. And if the nurses aren't there, or we have people that aren't trained or whatever, then nobody else can administer it. And so I think I really thank
Sure.
Joe Flanagan for doing that, because he's also going to Berlin and doing it to the Berlin
Good.
staff as well.
Good.
And to explain the differences between Narcan at an elementary level and how that's very minimally, that's really not, Narcan's really for adults
Mhm.
and for older students, but you just never know. And maybe if you even had an adult in the building,
Mhm.
for some whatever reason, that would have it, everybody would be trained to be able
Okay.
to utilize it.
That's
Yeah,
good.
that's good.
So that's the
Good.
big driving force on this. If you look at where our current Berlin Boylston, I don't know if I even have when this was adopted, but it was quite some time. And so, does it say in here? Yeah,
it
it was November 2014 is when we looked at it, which was a little over a year ago. And the biggest change is that number 2 that's highlighted there, as well as the delegation of the EpiPen administration to unlicensed personnel, for people to be able to even just use an EpiPen.
which also makes sense.
Correct.
And it's not terribly controversial. Makes
Right. So the other medicine, the wording was actually brought forward from MASC recommendation, and then we had Karen look at it with the nurses to make sure it made sense for all of us in the health.
So I'm okay with that one,
Yeah.
the way it is. So I'll make a motion to move forward policy JLCD with the school committee for approval.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good.
Great.
1 down. I have a feeling that's going to be a short one.
That's as quick as it's gonna get, I'm sorry. Maybe not. So with the social networking, you have, what I did was I had asked you if I could bring this forward to the teachers, just for some feedback. And so you should have gotten copies of the emails of what the different.
We did.
We got 2, right?
So.
We didn't get anything from the,
Boylston was,
Boylston.
they were comfortable with what the school committee decides.
Right. Elizabeth Bennett and Deborah Julius. So
Yep.
that one.
so
So what I did was I brought them what our current one is, and then I showed them Long Meadow. And I explained the differences and so forth to them, and then they went back to their association. my concern, if you remember, Kurt, originally was I felt we were going a little bit too much down the negative road of, rather than policies are set up, the purpose of a policy is for protection of the district, but it's also protection of our staff. And we kind of felt, I kind of was feeling that at the time that the social media policy that Long Meadow had was a little bit more of a negative tone. Don't do this, don't do that. Whereas I wanted to kind of just see
It
it.
was also more restrictive too.
It was a lot more restrictive.
It was like you can't do.
Yeah, so
There's quite a few of those.
Yeah, so I kind of had a little bit of an issue with that, and when I brought it forward to the teachers, I explained that to them too, and why I asked for it to come forward, because they're like, we don't run policy, school committee runs policy. I said, right, but this also has an impact on everybody within, and I really wanted the feedback from them. So I thought Bill Whitehead was very, when he submitted his suggested language, it was just very open. I think some of it was really great the way it was worded, but I also feel that some of it might be just a little bit too vague.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it meets the
was a little
purpose
too
of the
soft.
policy. Yeah.
One of the things I liked about the Long Meadow policy was that it was clearly defined. There wasn't a lot of gray area, and there wasn't a lot of leaving things up to people's judgment. Because if you're needing to pull out this policy, it means someone's probably been exercising questionable judgment already. And so I like that was pretty definitive. It was also pretty strong. And it was also much more restrictive. But, on one hand you say, well, what teachers must use school-sponsored email addresses. School, like my teachers must have, one is an example, if they have a Facebook thing for which students can access it must be, it has to be not part of their private one, and they have to have a total, almost like a mirror type of thing, but it was very clear. So someone reading that, they might not love what it says,
But they understood the expectation.
It's black and white, which is really kind of nice. And what I didn't love about our proposal in there was more that it was.
When you say our proposal, which one?
Well, actually, it's more ours. Period. Actually, is what it is.
Our current
our
policy.
current one. I in comparison, you're really just suggesting. You're saying we would suggest this. It would be good if you did this. We think this is better. And so it's not a policy. It's like just a nice invitation. And so I don't really think that's necessarily black and white enough. I don't think that's
Our current one.
If we want people to do something a certain way, if we feel that is in the best interest of the school district and the students and even the staff, but then on something like this, I think we should be a little bit more clear. Although I didn't know which sections Bill was referring to in his email.
Okay.
So
some of the things he was actually referring back to, I think, was more of the Long Meadow policy, not our current policy.
Right.
okay.
If we were to refer to the Long Meadow, because I had said to them, we were kind of leaning towards the Long Meadow. So I think what he was doing is his comments were geared towards that one. That's the way I understood his comments to be.
It was not specifically referencing a certain section. Because I was trying
what
to
he's
figure
saying
out
is
if he
that
was.
all of this, when I met with him afterwards, what he said was, you have pages and pages and pages. And he's saying, really, this could be a policy. And I said, well, that's a little bit
Yeah, that's enough.
That's a little too much, too
too little, right? So, and I said to him that, the other piece that I said to all of the associations is, this policy is very important because there are people that I know of that actually who have actually lost their jobs based on the social networking policies and not abiding by them. And it's a tricky topic, especially where social networking has just blossomed. We have Twitter. What does that mean about our Twitter accounts? We have, and everybody's encouraged to do those. And you have your Facebook, and we've got, each school through the PTOs as well has their own Facebook pages. So what are we saying about those? Or, it gets a little bit tricky, and who knows what 6 months from now what's going to come out, or 1 year from now, or 2 years from now.
And that's why I agree with that, right? But that's why I find sometimes if you get too prescriptive about some stuff, when these things are ever always changing, you're not able to keep up on them. And with some of them, we need to have some broad yet clear definitions of boundaries. Because as I read the Long Meadow ones, and they're using specifics like, you can't friend somebody.
Right.
Well, friend is a form, it's no different than following somebody on Twitter, right? It's
Right.
subscribing to a feed of some sort.
Right.
That would basically say that all our Twitter accounts violate that policy. Right? So,
Because I do have students that follow the Twitter account for various reasons.
well, and they're
If
set up for that
That's
reason,
right.
So I think there needs to be clear things that, any school business needs to be, or with a student, needs to be conducted using a school email address. There's certain things like that that need to be very prescriptive, but some of these other things need to be general, because it doesn't really matter whether it's social media communication or other communications. There's standards of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and those need to be followed. So I don't know if that doesn't say specifically what I like and dislike, but I think Long Meadow is too much prescriptive, and the danger of that is we may miss things because it's an ever-evolving type of environment.
So if we wanted to start looking at a policy, do you want to use Long Meadows or your current one to start
As a
looking at a
building?
revision?
I think well, there are elements of Long Meadows that I think are important to include places
Yep.
where you can be specific, and I do agree that by using general terms, there are things, there'll be something new that comes out next year, and so we should probably have. One of the things that they did well is when they have a definition section, and that was good because again that gives people an idea of this is what we're talking about, and you can, and they actually state what these are examples, but not limited to, and so you can have some of those definitions in there that can be that can attempt to be encompassing of whatever the next term is for friending or following or whatever that is. I think that helps. I found that Long Meadows was a little bit confusing to follow because they started to prescribe some of their rules in the definition section.
Yeah.
What is prohibited use, I think it was. And so that got a little bit kind of it was painful to read because it just wasn't structured very well.
Right.
So to get back to your question of which one to use as a starting point, I think we might want to consider highlighting the sections of each one that appeal to us, and then we can combine them. It's not a super fast exercise, but it's kind of maybe what we need to do. And
Would you like me to make copies of
That'd be nice.
these? Then you're not using that.
And I like the recommendation of having a definition section. I think that's helpful. I think we also need in that purpose type of section, the overarching that doesn't supersede any of our policy on how a teacher or administration is to conduct themselves with students, right? If anything, this supports that.
and I think the structure overall, I mean, I like the fact that ours was only 4 pages and theirs was what, like 8 or 9?
Yeah.
Of course, we had smaller type, but still, I think the basic building blocks are there. I don't want it to be too vague. I just don't want to have it be, if there's things that we don't think are appropriate, then I think we owe it to people to say that.
Okay.
If there's things that we want them to use their judgment on, which I don't find as much. I know this is a special case, but I tend to not want to. What you would consider good judgment, I would consider with judgment. In some cases, it might not be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given that there's all kinds of people out there, and you read news stories all the time of some, like, my teacher clearly used very poor judgment, and that got them on CNN, and that. So you just don't, leaving things up to people's judgment always makes me a little bit nervous, because not everyone is like you and me.
I agree, but those same type of conditions should be covered in the expectations of teachers, right? Our policies related to that. This
It
doesn't,
should.
right?
It
So this
absolutely
needs
should.
they need to go hand in hand, right? It isn't, you have a separate set of expectation because now it's online, right? It
I
needs
would agree
to,
with that
it needs to
entirely, yes.
capture those things that are unique about it, but support the overall
Yeah.
proper conduct that we expect.
And I think our document went a little bit further towards talking about the expectations of the role, expectations for staff behavior. I thought Long Meadow probably didn't focus on that as much as telling people what they couldn't do, but
Yeah.
Ours basically said this is the expectation of your behavior. I just wanted to go, in some cases, not all, a little bit further, just to say what, if we really don't feel like something is appropriate, let's just call it out.
Here's some highlighters if you want to.
Thank you. We love highlighters.
Do we want to start with one in particular?
Let's start with the Long Meadow one, just because
Okay.
that'll be the easier one to take stuff from, as far as sex. So what definitions I like. Use green for that. And I like having a purpose statement. Ours kind of does. Like it, but the other thing, I think they both said, this policy does not, but all of our other policies are still in a active, regardless of this policy. I think ours kind of called out specifically the acceptable use policy specifically. But I thought I thought Long Meadow might have called out just.
I actually
general.
like the idea of any of your policies to start off with a purpose. What's the purpose of the
Yeah,
policy?
no,
It's
I
just a
agree.
nice, clean.
Yeah. and
Maybe
so,
as we start
we
revising,
call
we
it-
start thinking of putting purpose at the beginning of our policies.
So it should say something that this is to support the existing, what was it called?
with the technology acceptable use policy.
Well, yeah,
That's
but
ours.
it's also, do we have a policy on proper behaviors of teachers?
We have one
Staff?
for school
There is,
committee norms
there's
and standards.
there's a,
Yeah, it
there's
says
a code.
Teachers aren't allowed to fraternize with kids and all
Right.
those types of things.
Yeah.
This is just supporting that.
Right. So that would be.
This doesn't supersede that, doesn't, because something may not be specifically called out here, doesn't mean it isn't applicable on social media.
Right. This is going to be a working meeting.
So at the beginning, you start with your governing body. And that's the school district itself, and then the school committee.
I know school committee has a norms and standards policy for us.
Right, well, it's a code of ethics, and then you have a norms and standards.
That's school committee, not.
Mm-hmm. And then it goes into administration.
So if we just started off with this policy is adopted in addition to and not substitute for, and then list our acceptable use policy and our norms and standards or standards of conduct or whatever the other one is, and just call out those policy numbers or letters in this case.
So just so you know, superintendent has a code of ethics for administration, but there's not a norms and standards for administration.
Okay. So we could call that first section scope, where we just call out that this is intended to be in addition to and not substitute for those
Other
policies. So let's call that scope.
So for staff ethics and conflict of interest, staff conduct.
So conduct. And then what was the next one?
It's a staff ethics / conflict of interest.
Ethics. And then conduct. And are there any others that are similar?
No, that's what I'm looking.
Okay,
That's just them
interesting.
downstairs. Underneath is the punching bag, so usually at night you can hear that boom, 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 boom.
Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, there's nothing.
All right. So I think we should list those for administration and for staff in this section because as a policy, it's for the
We
whole
just
district.
refer to them
Yeah.
rather than we're not listing it, right? We would just say refer to
Yes.
policy
Oh, yeah,
such
yeah,
and
yeah,
such,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if we call section 1 scope, on our copy right now,
Yep.
it's called the technology acceptable use policy.
Mm-hmm.
But if we just call that scope and we list the ethics, conflict of interest, the conduct with the technology acceptable use, any of the ones that we think interact here,
Mm-hmm.
and we just say much as we have now, what this policy is adopted in addition to and not substitute for. You know,
Yep. So this is the other thing that's interesting, is we have a school districts, this is one of the things that Paul and I saw when we were looking at this. We have a technology acceptable use policy, and it's pretty
So you're-
extensive.
which one are you- oh, you're
On the current one that we
yeah, that
have,
was kind of bouncing,
right?
sorry.
We have this. MASC has actually taken this out and combined with this, and Paul and I both agree that now you need to have this and that,
Yeah.
just so that you know. If you look into MASC and you ever decide to compare, what they've done is they've combined, and we feel that what we have right now is much more
Yeah,
substantial.
yeah. No, I recall going over that one.
Yeah, I bet you do. I remember
Yeah.
too. All right.
So if we call out we'll call our section 1 scope, and we'll call out all these other policies that we feel are
Mhm.
appropriate to reference. And then our section 2 is purpose, and that will be just that overview of why this policy needs to exist. And I like some of what they said, but I like more of what we said. Just
Are there things in here that we don't need? Would you like some water or something?
No,
Tom?
I'm good.
How's that?
I'll stop.
I have some lifesavers up there too if you need them.
I personally am a big fan of more bullets and smaller paragraphs, but that's beside the point right now. It's easier for people to read. And the more likely someone is to read something, the more likely you are to not have to explain it to them when they didn't actually read it. But I thought our general concerns are a pretty good way of introducing it. Long Meadow, yes, it's all kinds of well and good that they're interested in 21st century education and preparation and all that, but I think we kind of get to more of the point of this.
So, I
what are you
actually.
saying? Repurpose our general concerns as the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I will
if we
say
see anything
that-
that we particularly like, we can use that.
So if I were to read what we currently have, some of the things, Larry, I think that you brought up initially was the fact that some of the language or some of the wording that we had.
Yeah.
And so if we look at this, for example, where you go,
Ours is very negative based.
I
Very
agree.
concern based.
And it addressed concern, where I like purpose, so if there's a way that we could reword this a little bit
Sure.
to make it be more like, so that the why is this happening, right? Which is what you want to do.
Right. Swing positive.
Right, try to, my optimistic swinging in here,
Increase
right?
importance of electronic communication and social media for the social interaction and education. I mean, there's no social interaction for education.
Right.
Right, that's the purpose.
I think, right. So I do like this first sentence of Longmeadow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't like the second.
Mm-mm.
I didn't really feel a need for the third.
I didn't either for the rest of that paragraph. It's just I like that opening.
Okay, that's fine. That works.
And I would get rid of our first sentence there. My
Our first
suggestion. Because you're basically saying it in a nutshell in that first sentence of the Longmeadow.
Okay. I don't love our second sentence.
I don't either. But I can see where that's a concern, right? Where somehow we want to address the fact of the importance of the professional and personal life not getting blurred.
And that's one of those where you're, again, I'm not big on relying on other people's judgment so much. I know it's very easy to get too prescriptive, but we also know that depending on people's judgment, who might not make the same judgment call,
Right.
and that's where you get on seeing that.
Right. And then the question becomes, when you go even a little further, our staff should always be mindful of how they present themselves in the world, online and otherwise. I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a
Yep,
very
that's good.
important statement. And I always tell everybody, and sometimes we all get caught into it because we're human and it's social media, but I always tell everybody that even if you sign on Facebook as your own self, you are yourself second. You're an employee and a representative publicly first.
It's hard for people to see the difference.
Mm-hmm. So here, should an educator friend a student on Facebook, subscribe to a student's Twitter account, regularly engage in email chat with a student, exchange text messages with students, or engage in other electronic communication, the school district is concerned, and the educator should be concerned that such activities may undermine the educator's authority to maintain discipline. So,
Right, but these aren't purposes.
right.
They may be good.
They're just
things.
concerns, but I think those are all even separate pieces. For example, I don't see why an educator would friend somebody on Facebook on their personal Facebook, but if it's a school-based Facebook page,
Right.
they would. It's a purpose of messaging, right? And then subscribes a student's Twitter account. Well, that's our big means of communication. That's what we use that for. But I'm not going to sit there and start putting my Bon Jovi or my
Mhm.
Tim McGraw likes or whatever retweets on there either. So not if I have students that are following me, which I don't think that should be the purpose of Twitter.
Would you have two separate Twitter accounts?
I used to. And then I found that everybody, so when I first started with the Twitter account, the very beginning, right? I had my own personal Twitter account. And it's when Twitter first came out. So I had my own personal Twitter account. And so I was doing my own personal thing. And then I had a BBRSD Twitter account. Berlin Boylston, it was PS. Well, I was trying to get people to follow that one, whether through my blog or whatever, and everything I would post, I would only post there. But then I found out that people knew my name and found my name, and more people were following my Twitter account of Nadine Ekstrom rather than Berlin. So that's when all my personal stuff stopped on Twitter. As soon as I started to see that people were tweeting it, I stopped doing it because I follow my country. I like country, so that was my thing to follow. I don't retweet anything with country. I don't like anything with country. Like everything that I post now or like is all educationally based because I started getting people following that. And it was very hard to have just Nadine Ekstrom personal and Nadine Ekstrom or Berlin Boylston because people weren't following that one. So it had to shift. So which means I had to shift my tweets or my responses. So it gets very tricky.
One of the things that the Long Meadow policy advocates is having a separate Facebook account for like John Smith, the teacher, versus John Smith, the person. And I think that I kind of wonder, that starts getting hard, and that also starts it really puts more work on the teacher to keep those separate and manage that. But you also can't tell someone who's a person outside of being a teacher that they can't have a personal, like, a social media life. And
Correct.
So it's almost better if you say, okay, well, this is your personal thing. Manage your privacy settings accordingly, and just don't friend or don't friend anything associated with your teaching life. But of course, a lot of my teachers are friends on the outside, and a lot of former students they friend, and
I have former students that are no longer students of Tohoto, no more connection with Tohoto, that have become friends on my Facebook. I post whatever I post on Facebook. I always say I'm a superintendent first, a Nadine Ekstrom second. It's just kind of what happens in the social media world. I mean, I have most of the school committee are friends on Facebook, former school committee friends on Facebook, because you're gonna see it anyway.
See, but I think you have to make a choice. If you choose to have one account, then you choose to use it for your professional side, well, you've made that decision, right? It shouldn't be your personal one anymore. But you can choose to have two and use them for two separate things, and there are ways to set them up. So you don't have to friend or like people or let people follow you and certain things. So it's a decision of choices. I think teachers need to know that if they choose to use their personal for this, then it becomes that. But if they choose to have a separate one for school, then they have that.
I have had teachers, actually, or I've had people in the community that have seen over the past, this is a few years back, where teachers have blatantly put out things that might not have represented them well. As a teacher, let's say.
Yes.
And parents or people in the community have actually screenshot those comments and have sent them to me. And I've actually had one-to-one conversations with teachers just as hey, here's a heads up. This is never personal. When you're on there, this is a public. And these things that you said could impact, if you read the policy, and you read policies, not even just about social media, but just the fact of how you're representing yourself
Mhm.
and to undermine your governing body or to undermine your administration publicly like this, what the impact is of that. And just to have a conversation and they get like, oh my God, I said, look, I'm not saying anything or doing anything, I'm just giving you a heads up, but don't let this continue because these things can come forward. They have to have a right to speech, right? But freedom of speech, but there's also in here when you are, degrading or negating, and I'm always saying you don't say anything negative about your governing body. They are your boss. And we don't do things like that publicly. You can not be happy with something privately and with your own self or in a private, but when you post something on Facebook, that is a public piece of information because it's out there.
It can be a public piece of information. There are ways through privacy, settings and such that people can control that, but that's a risk or work that they
A
have
chance you
elected to
take, you choose to take, right?
Yeah.
Good
I would
point.
agree. It does get more challenging in an environment like our two towns, where very small towns. A lot of our staff actually live here.
Mhm.
A lot of our staff are friends with parents.
Mhm.
And so it's a very, very difficult kind of separation. If you live in a big city, or if or if you have most of your staff works far away from home or something, and there isn't as much crossover, maybe it's easier. But I can see it being very difficult here because it's one thing for us to say you should have one for personal and one for professional if that's what you want to do. And it's something else for other people to then respect that boundary who aren't in any way governed by this. And so I can see how there would be some concerns from the staff, and I think reasonable concerns. So, I mean, I can see where Longmeadow ended up where they did. And perhaps you're right. It's just, it comes down to if you're going to have one, or if you're going to have one online presence, you and all your other friends on Facebook or all your other followers on Twitter or whatever. I don't know how Twitter works. I just don't do it. Because, so as an example, I'm very conscious of the fact that I do one thing. I have one Facebook page. I just don't. I barely do that. But sometimes I'll have a friend who is not at all in touch with, what I do for work, what I do with school committee, what I do in town, try to post something up on my wall that I'm thinking, no, I don't really want that. So I went hunting around, and you can control that. Not everyone realizes that. And sometimes people will post something and you'll have to delete it. How quickly you get to that, and something that's concerning, it's one thing to control your own actions, it's something else to control everyone else's.
Yeah, and
Right,
honestly,
but we're not talking here about controlling other people's, we're controlling
Right.
your actions.
I mean, you can't always determine, like you said, what somebody else puts on your
Yeah.
on your social media
You
site.
can't control who sees it.
Yes.
So we're not here talking about holding people accountable for something somebody else may have
Right.
posted on their
Right.
wall or
That's a
something
fair
like that.
point. That's
Yeah.
a fair point. So what do you think we should be specifying that people, or should we be suggesting that people have two separate online presences?
I don't know if we need to be that prescriptive, I guess I'm saying. That we need to tell them that if they're using these social medias as when they're using it as part of the schoolwork and that they're representing the school, that they need to be doing it with their, as an agent, or I don't know what the proper term is, but they are working on behalf of the school.
Okay.
Right, because this,
And
even
I
in
actually-
Longmeadows, they go on to say that in one of their sections, about, freedom of speech and all that. Oh, in the statement, section 1 statement to
Right.
LPS, notwithstanding, when staff members speak through social media or matters concerning their work, they are speaking as employees, and as such, restrictions apply. Just because you want to post something and you're an employee, you don't have freedom of speech on everything you say.
Yeah, and that, I kind of wonder.
It's the law too.
Right.
It's
You can't hide behind that. Is what they're saying.
that's exactly what I'm saying. But you also can't tell people they don't have freedom of speech.
But
I think
it
this
is with
actually does-
limitations,
I
and I
think
think
this
this is
does
a
a
way
good
of
job of saying
saying,
it.
yeah,
You do have, and it says in the first statement where you do, right? You have, freedom of speech to communicate with fellow union members and workplace issues and blah, blah, blah. No one's restricting that, but you can't, if you're going to be talking as on behalf of the school or to students, there are restrictions.
Right. But we also don't want them talking on behalf of themselves in a manner that they're not properly representing the school, because they're speaking as employees too.
I think that's really what that first paragraph is getting at, without telling them they don't have a right to put what they want. They have a choice, and if they decide to represent themselves inappropriately, it's basically saying there's consequences to that, but that's your
Yeah.
choice. But just keep in mind that there's a consequence, a potential consequence, I guess.
Staff members are role models, not students' friends. And
Right.
should
Yes.
always conduct themselves in accordance with this understanding. I think that's
And
that section right
That's-
there.
and actually, I think we said something very much like that.
So
I think we need to-
let's go back if we could, just to make sure we're not
Sorry,
jumping all
we're-
over.
we
That's
are-
okay.
We
We
are
all
doing that.
we have to, I think, to just work through it. It's a complex topic. So I think that this piece, even though it's important, after we highlighted that word online and otherwise, even though it's important, I think we agree that that just doesn't belong here, and maybe it needs to be reworded something like what we just heard there.
Okay, because they're not, we're trying to craft a purpose statement.
Correct.
Right? And maybe there is a section on general concerns where that could be, right?
Mhm.
But if we're trying to have a purpose statement, it should be with the purpose
Right.
of the policy.
I think we should keep this for
Purpose of the
later.
policy is, as we're saying, that we recognize that social media is an important piece of interaction and education these days.
Mhm.
And as such, we would be able to provide some guidance.
Yeah, that's fine. That works.
I think your second is still good for the purpose, though, that in
In
addition.
addition, so why though don't we have a policy that says if you are conducting school business as a
Mhm.
teacher, that you must use your school email address and school
Well,
equipment?
That's what we could be saying in the social networking piece.
Right.
I think Norm understood.
Instead of we get into this whole rationale because of open, well, it doesn't get into open meeting, but,
Public records
public
request.
records, that it's a good idea and about, but shouldn't the policy should be that if you're going to conduct, if you're going to use social media tools as part of your classroom, you should be conducting them using school equipment and your school given
resources.
email.
Otherwise, I mean, we have a right to, right, otherwise, if they use their own personal,
And they shouldn't be using their own personal stuff for school business.
so, I agree with you. However, this is my phone. Right?
I was
have
just
my
thinking
email.
that was the phone
Right.
problem. Yeah.
I have my email.
Mhm.
I have my Google Classrooms. I have my my calendar, my Twitter account that I do, my blog for the district.
Okay.
Everything's on my phone, but this is my phone. I'm just playing devil's
Yeah,
advocate
no, I
here.
get it.
And we're not going to provide people with phones.
Right, exactly. And you know what? I'd be lost without. I mean, I sleep with this thing. I hate to admit it on camera, but I do. I sleep with this thing under my pillow.
You know, I get so the proliferation of devices has made that complex. But if you're posting stuff, okay, so maybe you should still be doing it, you should be doing it as a representative of the school, right?
Right.
So meaning you should be using your email address that is your school-given one, not your personal ones. So I'm trying to draw. I
Right.
get that, and I guess technology has changed where it's not so much about the device anymore, but
Right.
maybe more so about the
Because our students
content.
use the smartphones, our teachers use
Yeah.
smartphones, right? So these are our personal devices.
Yep.
It's interesting. Some companies have gotten to the point where they're issuing people cell phones
Instead of laptops.
they want to control all of the company business, and so they can have their software on the phones. And so people can't log in with their personal iPhone, and that allows that level of control for something like this situation, and especially as the educational environment evolves, we're going to have more and more interaction with our
Absolutely.
phones. And in both situations, both policies here, it talks about, for example, if people are going on a field trip or to a sports event or something, and we want people to say, you know, hey, what's your cell phone number?
We have coaches that actually get students' cell phone numbers to text them
Right.
if there's a problem or with a game or whatever. The problem is the policy. Technically, they're in violation of the policy.
Yeah.
Right. Although, but they did say that
Yeah, no,
in
it's
certain
right,
exceptions.
right. So we've got to word it such. There's got to be boundaries.
Correct. They need to be able to do it, but it has to be, again, when we talk about the appropriate use of it. Because you can't just all of a sudden just be texting students just because.
I hate the word appropriate because
I know, define it.
It depends on your personal definition. Admittedly, we can't envision every circumstance in which we'll want
Mhm.
people to use their personal cell
But do we
phones.
define that in the code of ethics and that other stuff for the teachers?
With phones and
Appropriate?
texting and stuff?
No,
Oh,
just
the term
behaviors, 'cause
appropriate?
we're talking about behavior here.
You're right. You're right. But I don't think we get into. Well,
No, support and enforcement of policies of the committee and the implementation of regulations and school rules in regard to students. Diligence of submitting reports, care and protection of school property, legal responsibility, safety and welfare of students, including the need to ensure that all students are under supervision at all times. That's the conduct.
Really, so it's nothing-
Very, very simple. And the staff ethics, conflict of interest.
So it's nothing between student,
There's nothing
teacher
there,
type
no.
of-
yeah. I wonder if maybe that needs a little beefing up at some point. But to your point, Tom, a lot of the things that are called out in both versions, not just one of the other, are really about appropriate professional behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
He's using the word he doesn't like.
yeah, you know, I don't like the word because it's not, but you know, okay, even if you call it professional behavior, it's still a word that depends on your definition.
Unless we have a definition somewhere, whether it's...
Yeah, but if you have to define professional, A, that's making a statement, but B, how do you define professional?
Yeah.
You know, I suppose though, I kind of, even though it's more work, I kind of like what Tom was saying in terms of we might be better off with trying to put some like definition around professional behavior.
Does that belong here or
No,
somewhere
not here.
else? Right,
No,
it
it's
belongs.
general.
Yeah, right.
It
Not
belongs
here.
in one of the
And-
personnel.
And so at that point, it is just referenced. So
Mhm.
if you called it professional conduct and behaviors in that conduct policy, and you beef that up, then in theory you can take half the content out here, because
Let's try to
you're
explain that over, right?
yeah. Well, that's it. And because there's a great deal of the content in these that is basically pointing out, because at that point your social media policy is going to be relatively short, because now you're basically saying your professional behavior applies to here, and here's some examples, or applies to social media, here's some examples.
Is there any mass law about any of this to appropriate behavior, or what is in bounds and what's out of
Not
bounds?
that I'm aware of, but I can look into it. I mean, it's just such an evolving, a swinging door. Did Bill refer to anything in regards to use of personal, use of district property to access illegal? No.
I wonder if MASC has a template for professional behavior.
I'll look that up. I put that down here as a double check.
Because it would be great if someone had already been putting some thought into this, and so we're not just.
They just have here, note, any email from a personal account regarding a student and/or any legal issue pertaining to the district may be subpoenaed in a court of law.
Right. Well, that's open legal too.
I'm just thinking how we can condense this.
Not open legal. I'm sorry. That's public records law. Because you're a public employee.
Mm-hmm.
I think, what if we just used any email, any online communication using one's own personal resources?
Any electronic communication. I didn't like where it was talking about online or internet, because we're talking about electronic communication.
Right. Any electronic communication using one's own personal resources. And I wouldn't say here where they said regarding a student and/or any legal issue. I would say regarding district business, period.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is that though too restrictive?
But it's the truth. Oh, you mean, am I not being clear enough?
Yeah, it's district business out there, and maybe, is that really district business if they're using it to notify a student that the game is canceled?
It's district.
It is that
District, yep, because it's a
because
game
it's
that's
a
sponsored by the
school.
school. It's a school-sponsored event. So
I
that
thought
would
it
be
was a ski club, that's not a school.
It is.
It is.
Just.
Right,
checking
no,
to
I
make
see
sure
what you're
that it
saying, right?
passes
Let's
all
throw
those types of-
anything else out there, yeah.
Any school club, anything that's organized through the school, and the only gray area gets into something like PTO. Just because it depends on how they're organized.
Mhm.
But some,
Right.
like what BEF is, it's actually our the BEF is our Boylston Education Foundation, and they sponsor all kinds of events in the school, and they're technically their own company,
Oh,
but they are Inc.
okay. So it really is district, and any interactions with students could be whatever.
Any, how about any school or school related?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I don't think we actually have jurisdiction over some of those technically outside groups that are part of the school, but, let some legal person tell us otherwise.
In addition, any electronic communication using one's own personal resources regarding school or school-related business may be subpoenaed in a court of law. And get rid of these compromises of teachers. Right? The law requires public records. The law requires public employees who send, receive, or maintain records in their capacity as public employees to retain, disclose, and dispose of such records in compliance with strict provisions of the public records law. We can get rid of this a law applies whether or not. And staff members communicate through school-based resources such as staff emails. Such records are retained and archived through the school's information technology department. We can get rid of if, however, a teacher communicates outside the resources, such information is not retained. That's not necessary, right?
Yeah, no, I would take that out. I don't want to encourage it.
And then the burden falls on the teacher to comply with public records law when using personal email or social network accounts to communicate with students and or parents and guardians. That you'd want to keep is that the burden falls on the teacher to comply.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they'll say, well, it's not my responsibility to get
I'm
it.
just wondering if that's one of those times where we want to try to restrict personal equipment with certain exceptions. Actually, you know what? Let's just leave it how you have it, because this way we don't have to go into what those exceptions are.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's just have it how you laid it out.
Yeah, obviously we'll reword this and get it ready to see what we need to change. So, first we put the scope, then we have the purpose, right? And this second half of this paragraph, we'll find a different way of wording this and putting it somewhere else. I put here later in the policy, right? We'll take that section piece out. Kind of highlighted what we're gonna keep here and crossed out what we felt was just too much verbiage. Too much writing, how's that?
Yeah, that's good.
And then we have here expectations of staff, but you want to put in definition,
Definitions,
right?
yeah.
I really like that.
So 3
That does help.
definitions. So let's
And-
go over those
and-
definitions.
And that's an opportunity to really, so we don't have to keep on saying
What social media is or
but
what-
not limited to, or whatever the platforms may come up. This is a place where we can call out that this applies to. I like the term electronic communication,
Mhm.
because in a way that encompasses pretty much everything.
Okay, so we're gonna keep social media?
Social media,
Yes.
electronic communications,
Yes.
student.
And do we feel the need to keep all of that language that's in there, or is there some that's too restrictive? Like where they did examples of social media.
Definitions at this stage. And that's where I think they made a mistake. In some of these, they actually went on to
Right.
define restrictions, especially under prohibited conduct.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
where they went off the
But
rails.
social media, they're just attempting to define what it is.
I would say, I would start off with I wouldn't say any medium hosted on the internet, because someone could argue that if you're texting, or any like text-based thing,
Isn't technically.
it isn't hosted on the internet.
Right.
Or if you're on
It's in
your
the
cell
cloud.
phone. Yeah.
And next year they'll have a sun instead of a cloud, because there'll be something politically incorrect about the cloud or
So-
something, I don't know.
So,
But it doesn't
so
say web blog, social blogs.
any,
Podcasts.
I would say any electronic.
Let me look up the definition, see if there's a formal
Yeah, that's
definition.
true.
Any,
We don't have to reinvent it or try
Right.
to define this.
any, how about any,
Let me use my personal phone.
any electronic media? Any electronic media on which interactions between students.
Here we go. Social media are computer-mediated tools that allow people or companies to create, share, or exchange information, career interests, ideas, pictures, videos in virtual communities and networks. Social media is defined as, quote, a group of internet-based applications that build on the ideological and technological foundations of Web 2.0 and that allow the creation and exchange of user-generated content. Furthermore, social media depend upon mobile and web-based technologies to create highly interactive platforms through which individuals and communities share, co-create, discuss, and modify user-generated content. They introduce substantial and pervasive changes to communication between businesses, organizations, communities, and individuals. It goes on and on and on and on.
There's elements of that, good.
So, any electronic media on
Computer-mediated
in
tools.
which, well, if you say electronic media, you've pretty much covered everything.
Okay.
Any electronic media in which interactions between students and staff, or students between students and or staff can be conducted. And then
Do you have to say students and staff?
no, I guess you don't.
That could be staff to staff. See that we're trying
Any electronic media in which interactions can be conducted.
I
that's
kind of
a little
like this right here where it says, which electronic media is fine. So I said social media are computer-mediated tools that allow people or companies to create, share, or exchange information, career interests, ideas, and pictures, videos in virtual communities and networks.
Okay, so
Instead of businesses, I would say organizations. But
I mean, I
think,
kinda
the
like-
gist of that is there.
If we say any electronic media on which electronic media that allow staff to create, share, or exchange information,
that allow individuals or organizations.
okay, individuals
Or organizations
that,
to create, share, or exchange information, ideas, pictures, videos, in virtual communities and networks.
I would stop at that allow sharing of, and whatever the next three words were after that, but I don't think we need to get into specifics.
Okay.
Okay, so what if I do this? Any electronic media that allow individuals to create, share, or exchange information, ideas, pictures, videos, pictures/videos in virtual networks.
I wouldn't even say virtual networks.
Okay, videos. Period.
And it would be individuals and organizations.
Okay, let's try that sentence again. Any electronic media that allow individuals and/or organizations to create, share, or exchange information, ideas, pictures, or videos.
Yeah.
But where do they share or create them to? That's why I think it says in virtual community.
This includes, and so if you pick up the second sentence here, this includes web and mobile-based technologies that support interactive communication between organizations, communities, and individuals.
Exchange of user-generated content. That's good.
Yeah, so let's keep the second sentence.
Okay. Social media technologies
do we
take on
need the
many
rest?
different forms, including, no. I think we get it. Because then, if we don't include an example that comes up in 6 months or 9 months, then we gotta
Right.
revise it again, because we missed.
Yeah, so I just stopped after the second sentence.
We don't need MySpace anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Then we have the electronic communication.
You know what? Just keep the first sentence,
Okay.
right? Because again, we're getting into specifics. Do we want to just keep the last sentence also? And just say electronic communications can include communications that have no specific intended recipient? I wouldn't add all the stuff in the parenthesis, but just to make it clear how broad the statement is. I'm not hooked on that, it's just an idea.
I think if you just leave that one sentence.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
You need a definition for prohibited conduct. I think that's getting into the policy instead of the definition.
Yeah. I would take that and I would move it.
Yeah, well, you have in your current one, you have expectations of staff, and I think it goes more there.
Yes.
It's not a definition, so.
Yeah.
So our student, the definition, and I don't know why we need a definition for student.
District, you don't need, the committee, you don't need, and staff. I mean, we those are
We need
already previously.
staff.
But those are already previously defined in other policies.
Okay, so you're saying you don't need to.
I don't
define
think we
them
need to
here?
define them here on this policy.
Yeah, okay. I can work with that. Because we do call out the committee, the district, the staff, the students elsewhere.
You okay with that, Tom?
Yeah.
The two most important things are
Those
covered.
two.
Social media, right? I mean, we don't even need the student, and then this will be moved somewhere else. So let's see if there's anything else in Elizabeth.
I like their
Deb's.
statement to staff.
Yeah. So, let's look at that one, and
We have
maybe we look
something
at our
very
own,
similar
right, look at our
already.
own expectations.
Yeah, we have something very similar.
And you
That's the
go
whole
on
rest
and
of
on your expectations.
Yeah, but the whole rest of the policy is geared towards expectation of
Right.
staff. Whereas theirs talks about one general statement. I don't think we need responsibilities of the committee superintendent and administration because it just talks about staff. And because they define staff as employees.
Well, we've already identified the responsibility of a committee, the school committee, in another section.
Yes.
Remember that one?
Yeah. Well, I didn't think we needed the.
So we don't need that here.
I think any employee, contractor, anyone who provides services to the schools.
I think one thing that might be important is the superintendent and administration retain the right to monitor all activity on district-related social media.
Yeah, but that's not responsibilities of. That's a statement.
That's just a statement. So when you say
Yeah.
statement to staff, that might be a statement.
Yeah. If you want to take that and you want to copy it over to there. We already have an acceptable use policy, so that's not needed. And all policies must be reviewed, so that
Yeah,
we don't
so
need that.
just that number 2, I think, is important.
Just get rid of the responsibilities of the committee, because the committee's already defined what the responsibility is.
So this statement says the superintendent and administration retain the right to monitor all activity on district-related social media, all activity on LPS-owned equipment, and all activity on LPS networks.
I would say retains the right to monitor all school-related social media activity.
Yep, I agree.
Retains the right to monitor all school-related social media activity.
So, I'm just gonna throw something out there, just playing devil's advocate on this. I have somebody who is on our equipment, and I get told that they're doing something that's not school-related, but it's on our equipment. And I have to monitor that, I have to pull that, and I have to have access to that.
That's part of your acceptable use policy, right? That's somebody using school equipment for
yep.
personal, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm just brainstorming it with you here, that's all.
No, that makes sense.
Because we've had that situation.
Any organization that provides electronic access to the internet, you will always have people who feel that it's acceptable, no matter what the policies are, to have some reasonable personal use. And to an extent, I don't think you need to be restrictive of that.
No, that's what I was gonna say. I think if they're gonna use, like, we have teachers that have laptops, and we give them laptops. I have a laptop, right? They have laptops. And one thing that's in our policy is saying that they can't go into, say, their own Yahoo account or whatever on the district laptop. Maybe that's their only piece. Maybe there was a reason, for whatever reason, they had some emergency or whatever, they had to go into it. I don't think that really needs to be restricted, but they need to
Right.
be aware that if they're using a district laptop and they go on,
It's not theirs.
it's not it's not just their email anymore. We have a right to look at
You have
it.
a right to.
We have a right to look at it. Just like if I have to use mine for whatever reason, you have a right, if it gets pulled, to look at within that range of
Right.
employment.
So do we need to call?
So I don't think you need to get,
No, but I think all you were is beefing this statement up here too, to say that you have a right to monitor all district-related social media. You're saying regardless if it's on your company or your district-owned equipment or personal equipment.
Right, because we're not going to be, we legally might not own the cell phone But if they're accessing something, or if they're doing something school-related,
Right,
then it is our business.
right.
And so if you get into the hardware aspects of it, you start getting into that.
Right, and Paul can say that I use my cell phone to respond. Paul can actually pull in the responses and to see where the response actually came from, what piece of equipment it came from.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I know he can do that.
And if you think about it, people need to realize that these days anyone can see anything you do online.
Anything.
And,
It's kind of scary, really.
you know,
Talk about
I
the
mean,
big
that's-
boy network. It's like
that's how
right
they,
there.
that's how, what they like personalize all those ads on like every site you're on.
Mm-hmm.
Because
They've been tracking and they know where you've been.
That they know where you've been, and so I don't see why people are so hyped about an expectation of privacy when you're going on the public internet.
I'm just going Google. You
Yeah.
can see more than you ever thought you could. Okay, so
You're prying. No, not really.
Not really.
What's it is that? Is
No.
you never have any expectation of privacy?
Do we want to say that?
Everything we do should be recognized that it's public, and it will be scrutinized under this policy,
ugh,
or it can be,
what a terrible feeling.
but it is.
I know. But to read it in black and white. So let
Students and staff should recognize that.
That's some of that gets to, like this statement to the staff, right? Some of it gets to that.
I'm still a little hung up on the idea of calling it out as a statement to the staff. It's the policy. It's a statement.
right. So I'm wondering if just even where we have expectations of staff.
I was just thinking expectations.
Just
'Cause
expectations.
in a way, some of the stuff is not just geared to our staff. This
But
is.
are you saying to use these two paragraphs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Put
fine.
these two paragraphs under where we have expectations rather than
Right.
statement.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think the statement is like, I'm telling you, where here's an expectation,
Right.
right?
I think expectation is a better word. And I don't think we should just call out staff because someone is going to say, well, I'm a contractor, or I'm a student, or I'm a whatever. I'm a sub.
Okay. So we'll have this entire piece under expectation, and I'll continue with this
And
statement.
you'll add that number 2.
And I'll add that number 2.
You'll add it as we've slimmed it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we get to, they have communication media, meaning cellular phones and text messaging is what they've done.
Okay, so this is where we start getting into two very different philosophies.
Right.
I like some of the elements that they call out because they're good reminders of policies we already have elsewhere. Like, for example, we're talking about student names and images. I think that's already stated somewhere else, right?
So that brought up a question about the fact that we take pictures in the school, and kids at the beginning of the year, parents get a
Right.
disclosure,
A form,
right,
yeah.
a form, and at the beginning of the year, so we know before we take a picture, we always say, is there anybody here that's excluded that we can't take a picture of?
Right.
The concern came with, when they were reading this, was does that mean that we're in violation if we're taking pictures and putting it on our Twitter accounts? Because we're
Yes.
tweeting out to the community, and parents are like, I love it, I get to see the picture, I get to see this, so,
Yes, you are.
You
Because
are.
if you're doing
Right.
that as administration, you are.
right, and that's what we're doing.
And well.
There's an
even
event
if-
coming on, and we have a speaker in the school, and we're taking a picture of the speaker, and the kids are in there, and we're putting on social, we're violating, right?
If you have your lighting set well, you can see the kids.
Like, for example, a superintendent award. We were at the luncheon for the superintendent award. I took a picture of her. We put her on. Of course, she knew because she was right there, but technically, that's a violation.
Is she, well, actually, as long as her parents allowed her to, or if she's 18, as long as
She
she's
is,
allowed.
yeah.
But if they sign no at the beginning of the year on that.
Which
They
it wouldn't
can't.
happen if it was a no at the beginning of the year. And actually, I asked her for permission before I even did it. You know, I said to her, "Are you okay if I tweak this?" And she's like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
But
But you've asked specifically for permission for that content to go out.
But when we have, like in Boylston Elementary School, and we've got the tricycles going on, and the tricycle races, and the kids are all involved, and everybody's cheering and yaha, and it's a great fun thing, and we're taking pictures, and now we're going to tweet it out, right? ACE is in violation of that. Teachers are in violation of that. You know, so where does we need to fix that? Because that's the way of people loving that, the blogs, putting it up on our blogs
I think it's great to have
with
stuff
pictures.
out there, and I think parents tend to. It would be crazy if you got to a place where you said, okay, all students who are not allowed to have their picture taken have to sit in this section, and we're going to have the camera over there and facing the rest of the audience, and we can only take pictures from that angle. And that's unfortunate if we get to that place.
But I will tell you that out of all 3 buildings, we have maybe 3 families that have said no. So it's not like it's a...
So do you have to constantly be scanning for those students and saying...
We do.
Listen,
We
yeah.
just know who they are. So we just know that when we take it, we watch how we angle it, and we're always, that's the first question that we always ask each other: who can't have the pictures taken?
Your text dollars at work.
Right?
Sorry.
But this isn't gonna change or solve that, right?
No.
I just want to make sure we're not in violation, that our teachers, administration, that we're not in violation of that, because that is the new wave, and that, like all of our blogs.
Do we...
Right, but I guess I don't see where this, you've made a statement up here that this isn't to supersede any other policies. It's to help support those.
Well, do we call out
So
things like
we're talking-
photography in a different policy? Is that a policy or is that a procedure? So images, names and images of students being published. Is that in a procedure or is that in a policy?
I believe that's in a policy.
Because if that's in a separate policy, we don't need to repeat it here. It would be good to remind people that that policy exists, but I don't think we need to call it out again. Because then anytime you update one document, then you're forced to update a bunch of others.
In the use of form of communication, staff members.
So what they do here, that is, I guess we're saying as good as they kind of defining when a cell phone and when text messaging should and shouldn't be used.
Yeah.
And actually, Bill gave some suggestions on that too, to try
That's
to...
pretty good, you know, they have identified.
I actually kind of like most of it.
Yeah. Some great uses.
So, one of the pieces that Bill did put was, district employees should not add currently enrolled students as a friend or contact using a personal social media account. However, a teacher and/or classroom account for the purpose of education is acceptable. And what they're referring to there is like Google Classroom, for example. A lot of the kids are using Google Classroom, and that's how they're communicating. It is understood that even with the strictest privacy settings in place, any information willingly put out via social media should be considered public and therefore can be viewed by anyone. That was Bill's recommendation.
That's actually kind of good.
Wait, so that's.
I like
we
that
lean
one.
to Can you read that again?
Yeah, sure. District employees should not add currently enrolled students as a friend or contact using a personal social media account. However, a teacher and/or classroom account for the purpose of education is acceptable. It is understood that even with the strictest privacy settings in place, any information willingly put out via social media should be considered public and therefore can be viewed by anyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
It kind of gets rid of that whole friend piece. If you go into your own social media,
It was in theirs, or did we have something about?
you had
friends?
had something, I think. Like you had here something about Facebook, but they were saying, you know, if it's Facebook now, it can be something else next week. It can be.
Mhm.
How about add currently enrolled students as a contact, using a personal, or how about connect? Shouldn't connect using personal social media account. Something that
It's like subscribe, right?
yeah.
So you're saying district employees should not.
Which should not connect
With current.
with currently enrolled students using personal social media accounts.
And you may just want to draw out what does connect mean. It means things like friend, or, you know, just...
Well, it says here should not connect currently enrolled students as a friend.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or
Okay.
contact using a personal
Yeah.
social media
But
account.
that only calls out friend, and so I would just say connect,
Yep.
because that's general enough where it can mean I don't know if that's too general, but the thing is, if you start calling out a few, then the new term next year will
Yeah,
not help
something
you.
different. So yeah, we actually in our document have friend 5 times in there. Friends associated with such educational Facebook account should only be members of an educational community such as administrators, teachers, students, and parents of such students. It is strongly recommended that teachers reject friend requests from individuals who are not fit, that do not fit into these categories. Ooh, that gets confusing.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of words.
On bills, can we find another term for district employees? I'm always nervous that someone would say, "Well, I'm not an employee. I'm a sub," or "I'm not an employee. I'm an
They're an employee.
administrator."
If they're a
Unless you have a
sub, they're an employee,
definition
you
of
get a
what a-
payroll, you get a
Yes.
paycheck. You're an employee.
So-
the state defines employee
so how about
very
co-
broadly, right?
You're getting a payroll, you get a check from our district, you're an employee.
You don't even need to get a payroll to be an employee. Like, school committee members are considered employees of the state.
Yeah. Of the state or of the
Or
of
the
the town.
municipality.
Yeah.
Municipality, yep.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah, that's why we look at that token, whatever it is that makes me have to fill out another.
The thing, if you do district employees, if you don't do district employees, then you have to say district administration, faculty, staff,
fine.
teachers, so employees just kind of hits everybody.
Is it?
As long as it covers it, we're good, right? That's really
Yeah,
what you're
okay.
saying. As long as,
Yeah.
as long as a legal
Yep.
term or whatever governing term
That's fine.
is inclusive of it.
So this, then under expectations, we're gonna put that global piece, right? Statement to staff, and then this about the superintendent, and that'll be like a paragraph piece.
Mm-hmm.
So then, do I get rid of with these concerns in mind? This institutes social policy and announces the expectation of staff members. I can get rid of this, right? Because we're kind
Yeah.
of redefining this whole thing.
Yes.
And then number 1 will be Bill's piece.
Yeah.
And then can we get rid of this number 1 then?
Due to your own ignorance.
I know. Like, I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I think we can, if we're keeping it higher level and broader.
Yeah,
I think we
think we
can.
can get rid of that? Are you okay with that, Tom?
Yeah.
All right, and then number 2 is you must also know that any information you share privately with a recipient can be redistributed to the such recipient without your knowledge or consent. The same principles you apply to in-person communication should be applied to online conversation. I don't think we need to do that either. That should be common sense for them. If we're talking about professional manner,
Yeah, I find that's number 2 kind of confusing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
we okay to get rid of that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for number 3, if you could just start with the line, because we don't need to remind them that it's the school district that expects it.
Mm-hmm.
Just the line between your professional life and your personal life should be clearly drawn at all times. I would say there's no reason why this cannot be done.
Right, I mean, it's just very negative.
Yeah. All that is required is some forethought.
Yeah, I like the statement that there's a line between personal and but I don't really like anything else.
I don't either.
Yeah.
So it only talks about Facebook and email, so that's dated. What about Snapchat, Twitter, all these other things?
Instagram.
Sorry, I'm still on Facebook. I fully use that, let alone any of the others. Man, this
Facebook is so old-fashioned. I just don't even bother with it. Snapchat, Instagram.
There was one article I was reading, so it was in, like opinion piece that basically said, because parents always talk about how the kids are constantly migrating to something else, and there's 2 big reasons. One is like what people are always trying to hook up with what's trendy, but B, and this is more to what the point of the article is, they don't want to be with their parents around.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, that's so true.
So because their parents are trying to get on it so they can keep an eye on what's going on, that's why they're going to
That's why they're
something
not,
else.
yeah. So I think if we got rid of everything else on that paragraph, we keep that one line, there are some, or I'm wondering if
I
we
would
just
keep the
take,
last sentence.
I'm wondering if we even just take that line and where we talked about the expectations, right?
Oh,
We could just
yeah.
add that
Sure.
line to the back of that entire spot. So, staff members are role models, not students' friends, and should always conduct themselves in accordance with this understanding. The line between your professional life and your personal life should be clearly drawn at all times. Just
Yeah.
add that there.
That's fine.
Great idea. Do we have educational Facebook accounts?
We do.
Do we have a district Facebook account?
No, we have not done a full BBRST Facebook account, but each school has their own Facebook account,
Okay.
and the PTOs usually coordinating them, actually.
PTOs too? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Get rid of that altogether. If we look at our number 4, we can get rid of the for example.
Yeah, like from there down.
So what we're trying to say here, right, that no one should expect that anything posted online is private,
Right.
and that the legal and regulatory rules around posting or sharing confidential information, right, should not be posted online, even if you think it's private.
Yep.
Okay,
So we just slim that one down to the first 2 sentences.
great.
Okay.
So instead of encouraged on number 5, right, this is where we're talking about
Teachers?
Are expected.
teachers are expected to communicate with students and parents on educational matters only and only through school-based resources.
I would go to, do one abroad and say employees,
Yep.
since that
On
seems
what?
to be the term.
Yeah, district employees.
Yep. Such as school-provided email and web portal accounts. Yeah, it's not, we shouldn't say, in that other one, use of one's personal email or social networking account to discuss school business with students and parents is
Not
not allowed.
permitted.
Discouraged is too soft.
Yeah. And I would cut it off after that.
Yeah. Number 6, I don't think we need.
Not if it's not allowed.
Right.
Right. So that's gone. I think we already have the next statement somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the professional expectation, right? You are a role model, not a student's friend. We already included that
Yeah.
in the previous statement.
And number 8, we did too also, right?
Yeah, that hits that whole statement.
Have we include that, or do we just talk about it?
No, we said we were gonna, that statement, we're gonna include that under the expectation.
Yep.
Okay, and we don't need that
What's it,
again.
yeah. Freedom to communicate.
Okay, and this one is, I can't tell you how many staff members call from home and use their own home phones to contact parents.
Well, that gets into this whole smartphone type of thing, right?
Right.
Well, here's the thing, we don't want to, we can't, well, can we?
So I think it's good the way it's stated here, that it's discouraged, but you're not saying you can't.
Yeah, but we don't
So-
want them to use their personal Facebook account.
Yes, so maybe we take out personal email accounts and personal Facebook, but we do recognize that people are going to use their own cell phones or smartphones or other electronic
Right.
devices.
Yeah, because if a teacher's at home and they email or something, they can log in.
Yes, right, we
Mhm.
made all that, right. But they still may be using their home computer
Right, that's what I mean.
And that's fine, and,
or their
yeah.
own cell phone.
And
or-
Do we,
There are times where I might be home too, myself, and having to call
but do we have to
a
even
parent
include
or
this?
whatever, because it's the only time of the day that I finally get to do that. Say that, Larry?
Do we even need to include this? Because, I mean, saying that teachers are discouraged, or employees are discouraged from that, I mean, that doesn't even carry any weight.
That's true.
It's not really saying anything. It's just, it's like a suggestion.
I think just the second sentence even, I think is important. Your communications with students, even if you do not use school resources for such communications, are within the jurisdiction of the school district to monitor as they arise out of your position as an educator.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's fine.
So get rid of that first sentence altogether.
Yeah, and just go with the second one. I don't think we need the third. I don't think we need the fourth. I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't include any other part. So now we talk about cell phones, which I kind of liked actually. The cell phone and text messaging section from the Long Meadow one, because that actually did.
Is number 10 required? Isn't that part of the use policy?
Yeah.
Right.
So for 9, are we just going to?
We'll go back to Long Meadow and use that
Yeah,
one.
that's
Okay,
what I
so
was
just
thinking.
cross that out. And 10, we'll cross that out.
For the Long Meadow one, under the procedures, I didn't know if we needed number 1, but I like 2, 3, and 4.
So your question is really under the procedures?
Yeah, I was happy with the whole first paragraph. I'm happy with 2, 3, and 4, but number 1 just seems like, if we're saying, if there's a trip, or if there is like a sporting event,
I agree with that. Exclude that one.
you're just gonna be having to say, well, I can't text you to tell you that the game is canceled because I didn't get authorization from the principal.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Get rid of that.
That's too much.
That's a good idea.
Does that make sense to you? Okay, good.
Yep, and I'm just looking again. Faculty and student contact via cell phone and or text messaging should be minimalized. However, there are times where it is appropriate and or needed. Coaches, advisors staying in touch with players, members, chaperones, staying in touch with student group leaders, etc. Professional judgment is to be used. As with emails, personal phone records can be subpoenaed in a court of law. So we're gonna get rid of procedure 1. Keeping 2, 3, and 4, and keeping the background.
Yes.
Yes.
And we don't have to call it background and
No.
procedures. We can just.
I wouldn't actually call it procedures, because you can only do policy, you can't do
Yeah.
procedures.
So we'll just get rid of those headings, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Because really that's all one.
Yeah.
I'm going down one path.
So this whole thing can actually be number 9, and then this can be A, B, and C.
Okay.
Okay. Say number 11, if you're communicating as an employee. Kind of like number 11.
I wouldn't say if you are communicating as an employee,
When?
because that's up to their. No, I would just say in your online communications, readers will
Gotcha.
assume as an employee you speak for the district.
So in your online communications, it is assumed that you, what?
I was just trying to narrow it up because if a teacher goes online, makes a statement, period, they are seen as a teacher.
Right.
So if an employee, administrator, or teacher, or whoever, goes online and makes a statement, people see that statement as coming from that administrator or that teacher. They don't see it coming from John or Jane Smith.
Right. They see it as the role
We
for.
addressed that here, though, with notwithstanding this, when staff members speak through social media on matters concerning their work, they are speaking as employees, and as such, restrictions may be placed upon their freedom to express themselves.
This is kind of saying that
Regardless of what you're saying.
it's how.
It's how you're
It's
perceived.
right. It is. This is the perception piece,
Okay.
and now we can add it to that same place, though.
Yeah, that's fine.
You know, we can make it clear that, you know, so that doesn't have to be number 11. That can just be, and again, I think that can be one short sentence. But the idea is that it, you know, whether you think you're speaking personally or not, people see you as your professional presence.
So you want that after, on that statement and expectation, right? We added
Right.
the line between your professional life and your personal life should be clearly drawn at all times. In your online communications, you must be aware that readers will assume you speak for the district. Okay. Okay.
And actually, I would even say, in your online communications,
Readers.
readers, not assume, but readers will, readers perceive you as speaking for something like that. What you want to avoid is having someone say, well, if I start off my statement with personally, and at that point they think they're off the hook.
Text,
So readers perceive you to be speaking for the district. I've seen some folks do that, where they say, "This is my personal opinion,"
And then they think it's fine.
and then, well, right, because what distance themselves from their role.
Number
I
12?
don't have a problem with 12, except, it only says Facebook account.
social networking site and
This could
use.
be anything. Nobody should be using the school logo, likeness, or school photographs for anything
Right. So,
without permission from the superintendent of schools.
and so
and
we
the
can just
use of
say,
social networking.
yeah, that works.
The use of social networking, you may
How
not
about
about
more
it.
social media is better,
Okay.
but just to be consistent.
Okay.
I don't think we need 13.
His attempt to say, right, that today it's Facebook. Who knows
Right.
what tomorrow is.
Because they refer so
Or
much, we've
Snapchat.
referred so much. Okay, so is there a particular piece though that we missed? Because I feel like we took
Okay,
it
so
out.
let's go back to section 4. Oh, no, section. Do we have to address email any further? I don't think we really do, but I'm just asking. So, the next section after when we talk about cell phones and text messages on the Long Meadow one.
So meaning we're gonna adopt some of their stuff here, like we already.
No, I'm just thinking that we probably have covered the basic
Oh.
idea already.
So like email communications.
Because I don't think we need the background statement. Because
Mhm.
we've already covered.
Yeah, and these others I think we've pretty much covered.
And we have said, like they say specifically, staff shall not provide their personal email addresses to students. Have we been that explicit? It's a good
Nope.
statement.
I
It is a
thought,
good statement.
yeah.
We talked about how it should not be, it is not allowed, maybe we add that there. So where we said,
If we said it's not allowed, then.
no, what we've said here is that use of one's personal email account or social networking account to discuss school business with students and parents is not allowed. And then we should say, staff shall not provide their personal email addresses to students.
Good.
Should we say students and parents?
Yeah. How about with the school community?
So this gets tricky.
Yeah, I got a bit of a small community.
Small community,
Okay.
you have a lot of
Students, I think,
teachers.
Students, I think, we can be very specific.
We can be specific, right, to students, but some are friends with the parents and they live in the same community.
I know
We
a
don't
number
want
of
to print upon
examples.
that, but it is the students.
No, a number of examples of people where they would just look at the policy and say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, then they're knowingly
Then
in
they're
violation.
knowingly, right.
Yeah, well,
And
yeah,
there's the
but
risk that they
it
take.
puts people in a difficult spot. And I get it, but at the same time,
That's their choice.
yeah, it's one of those things where if someone,
This is being done for the right intent
yeah,
and spirit. If somebody wants to go against it, that's
it's
their
interesting.
choice. Doesn't mean they're right.
Right. I agree with you, and it's one of those things where if it's too broad and but there's an assumption that people are going to be are going to pay attention appropriately. There's also an assumption that the people administering the policy will not be going overboard. And that's one of the things that, you know, I've gotten comments in prior administrations. I've gotten comments from people who were genuinely nervous that something that they had, I think, a reasonable, you know, reason for doing it. But they were in fear because they weren't trusting the administration to use the policy the way it was really intended. They were saying, well, they could use that as a tool that they could get in trouble with. And so it's one of those things where we tend to be looking at all this through our eyes now, based on who's in the administrative roles now, who's on the school committee now, the environment now.
Very different.
But it could go very wrong, and people get nervous. And I think justifiably, there's a couple of my teachers who live in town here who are friends on the outside. The kids are friends, but the kids have been like friends on like Facebook with the teachers, simply because they're family friends. And it's just like, well, the intent of the policy isn't to go after them. That's not the point. But that teacher or one of those two, like my teachers, can come back and say, you know, well, so my friend can't be my Facebook friend, and so you end up having to reassure them that that's not really the intent of the policy.
Right.
And they say, but that's what you just approved. So it gets sticky.
It does.
All right. Anyway, off topic.
But it's a good point.
So I think we kind of rendered all that down to that one statement, which we added on to the other section. So we're done there.
Yep.
And then social media, web pages, and applications. I don't
think that is anything.
I don't really see that we need to repeat.
No.
We already
On the
have.
photograph, then, do we need anything on that?
We already have a policy for that, don't we?
We already have permission and so forth to use. The question, like I said, is that we want to make sure that nobody's in violation of being able to take the pictures. If the student is okay with the pictures, that we're not in violation to use it, to be able to use it on the social media.
Well, that's where.
But if somebody at the beginning of the year, the parent has said you can't, even if the kid says okay, you still can't.
Correct.
It's not until they're 18.
So don't you just make a statement here, use of photographs is governed by policy XX?
Right. Exactly. That's why it ought to be a reference, and we opted to reference in the under scope all the related policies. And so even if you just want to add it in front. So you know, from a
Unless
separate
you want
section.
to extend it like they have here, shall not identify a student by their full name.
Yeah, but if we're allowed to.
Yeah. Well, that was unless you wanted to make it more restrictive.
I don't know that we need to make it more restrictive.
Yep, I agree.
If we have written
If we already
permission,
have a policy.
if we have documented written permission already, there's no reason we can't.
So I'm going to say use of photographs
Is is governed by policy, or shall be in accordance with. Jeez, this thing goes on and on. Long Meadow's policy goes on and on.
Well, there clearly had to have been some kind of an issue.
Yeah.
Wow.
We already really addressed the social networking websites.
I was just scanning to see if there's anything we didn't really hit. This is where they call out separate identities, and that's something we really didn't touch on. So if we want to touch on it, that's enough.
So which one are you talking about?
So
On the social networking
in like their
website.
section E,
Yeah.
that's where under the number of paragraphs there, they start getting into the idea of if you want an education Facebook account or an education Twitter account versus a personal one. And so the question is, do we feel that we want to be recommending that? Or do we want to stay out of that and just stick with our earlier statement, which is basically just no?
So one thing that did come up is like number 6. And I think that's really important to add.
Yes, I agree with that. That's a good one to add.
I would make it more general and just say staff shall report any inappropriate use of social media by students or fellow staff. It's a general statement. It's not just about social media.
And then they also, the association also had something too about the use of district property to access illegal pornographic and/or gambling websites is strictly prohibited. It is understood that a pop-up advertisement for any of these above-mentioned cannot always be controlled by the user and/or restricted by district safeguards. Therefore, the user would be in violation if he or she did not did his or her due diligence in trying to minimize such an occurrence. And then when I met with them, we said, if this happens, which we were just kind of, the user shall immediately report it to the administration and technology coordinator. We oftentimes will use, teachers will use YouTube for something. And sometimes they'll use it, but on that side, there might be something that's really in violation that should never have been brought up on the screen.
You know why those things come up?
Yeah.
Because the browsing history.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
No, AdSense is all about your
History.
where you've been, and they put a lot of money into
That's
having
disgusting.
that personalized.
I'm sorry, but
Having
that's just...
that, it is personalized specifically to your browsing history, and because it's Google, and if you're logged in as Google,
It'll know you.
On any computer you log in on.
Right.
So, for example, when I have my Google app on my phone, I have all of my Chrome bookmarks pop up automatically here because it's Google that's transporting all that information wherever I log in. So if I get a new laptop at home, like my personal one, and I log in there, I don't have to transfer over anything.
It'll go right over.
And so AdSense, which is owned by Google, it uses all that information where you've been. And so that's why if that stuff is popping up,
It's time to pull the computer into a little search.
It may not have been on, your school computer, but it would be something else.
and
They should use programs like Ad Block and stuff like that.
and that
They
would
should be
be
using
something
that on
that they should
your
be
school
doing
computers anyway.
across the district anyway. But
Adware.
to an extent, if it's something like YouTube, they also go by what videos you've been pulling up, and so
Oh my.
because YouTube's also owned by Google. So again, because Google can control the world now, but just consider
Unbelievable.
that if people are saying if some of the feedback from the union
Is this?
so that then that would
So it could have been
suggest
somebody in their household or something like that.
okay, but again, if,
I'm with
if
you.
it's someone in their household, and that's why it's important to have a line
Yes,
between
totally
your
agree with that.
personal presence in the social media world and your professional presence. You don't necessarily want, and which now, as we talk about things like that, because they're bringing this up, it would suggest that has been an issue somewhere.
That's what's making me really going OMG.
Then we might want to reconsider when we didn't get into detail on having a personal and a professional presence separated. We might want to be reconsidering that, because the reality is we could have, it might be to the district's
Best interest.
and to the staff members' best interest to encourage that they have an educational account
on Google, you're saying for Google Docs and all that stuff.
Because
YouTube,
if they have.
Well, all
if
of our
they have
email
one-
is Google.
Right?
No, but when they log into YouTube or they log into Google Docs, are they using their school account? Their school email address?
That's a very good question.
They should be, right? They should be.
So if you're on Google email, that's great. They have an email address. Like,
Mhm.
I have 3 Google accounts. I have one's professional, one's personal, and one is BBRSD.
Mhm.
And so I can access all my BBRSD documents from my bbrsd.org Google account. And that's, as far as Google is concerned, that's a separate identity.
Separate entity. Yep.
And so when I log in under my personal one, all my AdSense stuff is like for car things and whatnot, because that's what I do.
Cars, BMWs.
And then when it's on the BBRSD, well, I've really only done like Google Docs and everything, but so, and on my business one, it comes up more stuff related to engineering. So they do see it as a separate stream.
Separate entrance.
And so I think we might want to reconsider the idea of recommending, or not, I shouldn't say recommending, but stating that that staff or employees should have a separate personal and professional presence.
Or do we say something that when they're using this stuff for school, that they use their BB
Right.
RSD, not that they have to maintain to or whatever, but
But they use the
Right.
district email.
they have to use that for if they're
Has
using
to log in
YouTube or
with-
any of those other social media
Mhm.
types of things related to education.
Yeah.
They must use
I
their.
think it probably makes sense to have something like that. in there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's probably good to also give them a little bit of training too on.
Yeah.
Oh,
on
this,
that,
you know what, I have to tell you.
It would be, right?
You just
Yeah.
gave me I have a bunch of different things that I've been collecting throughout this year that I need to revisit with the staff on the first day. I'm constantly thinking like, okay, that's a good first day back topic, or this is such a good first day topic, because I want to see everybody's faces in the audience.
It's just,
But
whatever
it's
they
just
do in
a-
their personal life, that's one thing, but when they're here, it's.
I'm curious as to what illegal pornographic and or gambling websites have popped up.
Yeah, I never see that.
Yeah, they don't come up for me. I don't know.
Me neither, I promise. First of all, I don't have time to even think of any of that stuff, so. All right, so number 14.
What they gotta start doing is using the ad block software too.
Right, so we want to state that when using social media sites for educational.
How about user how about user accounts, or like what the district provided user accounts should be used for all educational, however you.
Social
Mhm.
media, and maybe use some examples, YouTube, whatever else.
District provided user accounts shall,
Yeah.
that should be, right?
Shall, yeah.
Shall be
used for.
what's another word for used?
For
So I'm
accessing.
using user accounts.
Accessed.
Accessed.
Actually, that's saying that the user accounts will be
Are
accessed.
accessible, right?
Yeah, so,
Shall be,
user accounts shall be, utilized, another word for used,
Mhm.
when accessing social media, website for educational purposes, or accessing social media for educational purposes.
Okay, so district, I have to rewrite it because I got a little sloppy. District provided user accounts
Shall be
shall be
utilized.
utilized when accessing social media for educational purposes.
Right. And that should address the association's concern, albeit not normally expected.
I really am gonna use that for the first day as a FYI, because I wanna see the reaction on some of their faces. 'Cause you've got my wheels spinning right now for some of the people that complained about the pop-ups. Now I'm gonna be just kind of looking at them a little bit differently, I think. All right, let's see, access, and then you think, they've taken the laptop, I'm thinking like scenarios, right? They've taken their laptop, they've signed in with their Google, they never signed out, and maybe their teenage son or daughter said, "Mom or Dad, can I use your computer for a minute?" And they didn't sign out, which shouldn't be done anyway.
If it's a district computer,
It shouldn't be done
it
anyway.
shouldn't be.
Right, but you just
Although
think of those scenarios.
You'd prefer to think of that rather than.
The other. That's my hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think. So do we not want to suggest having separate private and?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I just wanted
Yeah.
to bring it up. And then under F on the next page. That's an interesting section, because in one sense, some of the things they've outlined just make sense to do and to point out, but I mean, they're basically talking about providing like what copyright recognition. They're talking about having any blogs or whatever that they keep.
I like that
Documented.
whole section actually,
Yeah.
because we haven't even addressed blogs.
This is good to have.
So I kind of like all that.
Like use cluster,
It because that's just smart management.
And then section 4 is probably nice to have too, unless it's in some other policy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that is.
This actually came up. This is actually really important to have, I think, that section. It's come up, it's also come up in regards to, and that'll be one of our future policies, is the use of movies in classrooms.
Oh yes, I recall when that came up. Yes.
Right. So, we need to update that as well, and as well as the Mass General Law. What there is, when they can use movies, what kind of movies they can use, and when they should get permission.
It's become an issue.
It has been. Yes, it's been an issue, and it was the cause of some feedback from parents. I fondly recall that event.
Right. So I think we need to just address that as
It's
well.
okay.
So, I don't know if this belongs in this.
I don't know
or if it
that's
belongs in a
policy.
different policy.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to say that there has to be something on the MASC template that covers things like that,
Right,
because
Yeah.
there's all kinds of stuff about like
So
public
what are you
records.
saying, section
I'm
4?
saying section
Section
4
4.
on the public records law and copyright protection, I think we need to use that, even in the use of media as a general,
okay.
not just social
But
media.
you're saying we keep it here, but maybe put it some other places too?
We'd keep it, but I think not necessarily in this policy. I think we need to revise a different policy
And then
and
reference
utilize this in
Right,
a
like you
different
can
policy.
reference it much like you referenced the thing on like names and photography.
Yeah, right, that's fine, but until we do that, we should make sure we have this somewhere. Because
Yeah.
I think it is important that, they cannot delete messages posted on social media and things
Yeah.
associated to that.
So do you want to keep that for now in this policy?
Unless there's another,
We don't have this in another policy.
then I think we need to keep this until we have it.
Okay.
Probably okay
And then we
to
can
do
always
that.
revise and remove if we,
Right. That's fine. Okay, so section 5 gets into some crossover too. And then,
yeah, we have bullying, cyberbullying already.
Yeah.
yeah.
We
In our
have a
policy,
pretty
yeah.
clear policy on that. Acceptable use, we got that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've covered that stuff.
Yeah,
So-
this is already,
And discipline. Do any of our policies get into, well, I guess they do.
mm-hmm.
I don't know that we need to call out
Yeah.
that here, because we already have policy.
We've already, and we've already stated the superintendent when we use that number 2.
Yeah,
We've already stated, and you know what, those consequences are not something that you would put in a policy.
right. That's why I don't think it needs to be
Yeah.
here. And also, taking that out of here helps the tone a bit.
Right, so it's not so negative on people.
Right.
All right, so I will go over this with Cheryl, she and I will revise it, and then we'll set up another sub-policy to review. We'll send it out to you both,
Hit
so
that
you can look at it.
and some of the other ones, I guess.
Do we have anything else, or that was it?
That was it for tonight, which was good. That was good to be able to just rip through that with you two, because it's dense.
That's it.
All right, so we need a
Close it
motion.
out.
So, motion to adjourn.
I second that motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.